This is the cloud, the big CapEx versus OpEx discussion. So welcome everybody, my name is Kim Schafer. I head up strategy and marketing at a company called Vertex. We provide a cloud-based platform for the customer experience to utilities only. Excited to be here, especially at this type of conference. You know, when we talk about digital technologies, we have to talk about cloud. And when we talk about clouds with utilities, we absolutely have to talk about capitalization and more specifically the rate recovery process with cloud-based solutions. So really excited to have that conversation. I'm very excited also to have these four gentlemen here on this panel to have this conversation as well as have the conversation with all of you in the room. Just to get things started, I'd like for each of the panelists to just introduce themselves and give you just a little blurb about themselves that you couldn't read in their biography on the agenda. So Rick, would you kick things off?
Sure, that last part threw me, but I'll do my best. I'm Rick Cutter with Cloud for Utilities. We're an industry organization focused on cloud technologies and innovation with cloud for the utility industry. We work in coordination with technology providers and utility companies. Something about myself is, you can't hear me? Is that better? You can hear me now? All right, sorry about that. So my name's Rick Cutter. I'm with Cloud for Utilities. We're an industry organization focused on the advancement of cloud technologies and cybersecurity. We work with utility organizations and also industry, software companies, providers, service providers on the models out there. We have an annual event where we do educational seminars very similar to ETS. We're actually partnered with ETS and have workshops in a similar manner as ETS does. Today I'm going to provide some support on the business models, and something about me is I am Southern. I'm from South Carolina. I have an accent, but I live in Southern California, so that's the best I can think. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick, and really glad that you're a part of this panel.
Thank you.
Brad.
Brad Almond, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Vertex, work with Kim. Been at this way too long, 30 years now in the technology and software business. Last 13 years as a Chief Financial Officer, always of SaaS-based companies, SaaS-based offerings. I've been at Vertex now and therefore the utility space for the last 5 years. So again, I was doing SaaS in 1993, so SaaS way before SaaS was hip and cool. We sure the heck didn't get to go to places like Austin and talk about SaaS in 1992.
Great, thanks, Brad. Jason.
Yeah, I'm Jason Scarlett. I'm the Director of Enterprise Architecture and Innovation at the nation's largest combined electric and gas utility, CPS Energy. You got to see our CEO, Paula, this morning, and our COO, Chris Euster, so I think they've covered that, but if you didn't hear that, CPS Energy is a municipal utility owned by the city of San Antonio. We are vertically integrated, which means we have our own generation, transmission, distribution, and we serve the customer in our community. So some fact that you might not know about me, I actually started my career in the electric utility industry at a small co-op outside of Washington, D.C. At the age of 18 years old, I was a co-op student and I worked there for 18 years. So I've been in the energy utility space for 25 plus years from that. So this is the only career I've only known, except for 2 years where I started up a new business on sensor networks and data analytics prior to joining CPS.
Awesome. I'm Mark Dombroski. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Austin Energy right here in Austin, Texas. So welcome. Austin Energy, like CPS, is a vertically integrated municipally owned utility, which is interesting because the whole CapEx, OpEx, and rate recovery isn't necessarily germane to us as much as the regulated utilities. But I do have some experience doing rate intervention work and FERC filings for major pipeline companies back with the deregulation of natural gas. And interesting tidbit, Brad did mention, but he and I worked together at KPMG. I think Reagan was still president back then, but a long time ago. So
could be Carter.
You might run into here.
Awesome, thanks, Mark. Let's get this started. The first question that I have, actually, a couple questions, is for the audience. I wanted to get a gauge of how many utility folks are in the audience. By Show of hands. Okay, so we've got a few utilities. In your organizations, how many of you are at least running just one cloud application that you know of? Yes? Maybe? Okay. So relevant discussion, I think. So Rick, as he explained, heads up and started Cloud for Utilities. And so Rick, I really want to guide this question to you. You know, cloud is this big name, and we know at the Cloud for Utilities Summit that we had, and we participated in November, there's a lot of education going on. And so I was hoping that you might be able to clarify the various cloud models that we're seeing, especially in the utilities industry.
Sure. There are multiple models I handed out, or had them hand out a couple of slides from a presentation we did back in November, trying to identify a little more succinctly what these different flavors of cloud are versus managed hosting, software as a service, et cetera. In essence, you're paying for a service, and the service varies based on these different models in the slides I've given you. A couple of examples would be infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then what we would call SaaS. I think collectively people would say those are cloud models where your data or your applications could reside in a remote facility, right? With a big firm, small firm, niche firm. Then you get into private cloud, which is very specific to your organization, or public cloud, could be more shared. And a couple of things here about who owns, who does different things are identified in the very first slide. All of these things are considered a service, which has different complexities on whether that cost can be capitalized as an expense on your financials. So that's one accounting issue we're going to talk a little bit about today. And the second issue, more relevant to an investor-owned utility, would be services typically are expensed, not able to put into a rate case. So that's sort of what we want to talk about today. I'm going to fast forward to a couple of slides down because I don't want to spend all day on this once you get to the heart of your conversation here. But the last slide has a bunch of pretty colors on it. To me, I think what's going to happen, what we believe at Cloud for Utilities, is that the utility of the future is going to have to embrace emerging technologies, right? We're seeing it now. We're the digitization of the utility. I believe, and a lot of people believe, that cloud will play a pretty significant role in that. Most sessions I've talked to about Internet of Things and those types of applications this week have discussed some form of cloud being managing big data, complex analytics that we as utilities want to use. But back to this SaaS model, is what this is illustrating is for enterprise SaaS, and the difference, what we're coining enterprise SaaS versus SaaS, is mission critical applications sometimes have changes for me. If it's my customer system, I may need to do a unique rate in my territory, unique tax. So I have to make a little tweak to that software product, the code, to do that sometimes, right? Hopefully I can do it in configuration, but sometimes it's code. So what we're trying to illustrate here is an enterprise SaaS model. These applications are very unique to our industry. There's going to be some tailoring of the application, and enterprise SaaS allows for that. If I look at what I would call a consumer SaaS model, where I go out to a website that I want to subscribe some service, I can't make any changes. I just download the app, whatever, it's on my screen, it's a web application, and I make no tailoring of that requires a code change. I call that consumer SaaS. So that's the big difference in the SaaS models that we're trying to communicate on these couple of slides. So I hope that gives you sort of a framework of what the models are looking like. Okay.
Great, thank you, Rick. And I think as we enter this era, and there is the cloud discussion, we have these new models, and as Rick articulated, it's moving more to the service base versus, you know, straight up software or the technology. So as such, our technology industry is moving and changing. But Brad, I was hoping that you might be able to share with everyone how the accounting standards have adapted to some of these changes, and more specifically around cloud technologies.
Got it, slowly. So, not that I'm going to describe it slowly. FASB has been quite slow. So no surprise that the Financial Accounting Standards Board, known as FASB, is usually 5 years behind any major industry trend. And that's pretty much where we've seen them. But the good news is they're actually catching up pretty quickly, which is surprising. So if it would help, let me kind of walk you through what the major accounting treatment for these cloud-based are and how they have evolved. And it actually, if I knew Rick was doing this, this is great, because this is a great slide. You can actually kind of walk through the accounting as we go along with this. So the gold standard forever for people developing software internally, for internal use, not for resell, was called internal use software, and it's topic 350-40 if you want to look that up in the FASB. That was the gold standard, and it was really simple. Any of your pre-development work, you're scoping it out, that was an expense. Once you started the development, whether you did it in-house or whether you did it with a third party, that was capitalizable. The implementation, the data conversion, the development, you got a lot of flexibility to put a lot of cost in there, capitalize it, and then amortize it over the expected life of the asset that you've just created, an intangible asset. And then the operating costs, actually keep it up and running, put it on servers, that was usually an OpEx expense. The cloud came along, and actually if you look at the managed hosting that's on that slide, what the FASB finally did in 2015 is they recognized the fact that a lot of people are going to want to put these solutions not on-prem, but they're going to want to put them in a cloud, either in a hosted arrangement or completely outsourced. And what the FASB said is you can use 350-40 for internal use software for cloud-based arrangements if, there's always an if with FASB, but it was a huge if. And the if was you had to have access to the software, you essentially had to own the software. And you had to be portable. You had to have the ability to take that software during or at the end of the hosting arrangement and move it somewhere else at a de minimis cost. Like, okay, that's not really where we're going with the SaaS Enterprise. As soon as you go to SaaS Enterprise, usually the software license is included during the term of the service. Here's the good news. In March, they issued this. Don't go anywhere without FASBs. This is a proposal that would take this step one more further and say, regardless of whether or not you own that, they take those two ifs away. You do not have to own the software. You don't have to have portability at the end. And this is out for proposal. Comments due April 30th. I'm writing mine right now, which is yes, adopt this. Appears to be going that way. Probably going to go into effect January 2019. This would allow full capitalization of any cloud-based service. You'd do all the implementation costs, capitalize them, and then you would amortize them over the term of the agreement plus any extension periods that are negotiated in the contract. So that's where it's headed. So as you think about it, to summarize, you used to be able to capitalize everything that Rick had here. You can now capitalize these pieces if you circle the utility-owned software portion here, and then hopefully in about 9 months, we've got full capitalization ability of the SaaS piece as well.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
One thing, I mean, why does this matter? Of course, if you're an investor owned, it's obvious you want to make a profit on these assets, but I've seen a lot of utilities that are going to these types of models. They really want to understand these rules because they're trying to utilize their contract vehicles with their vendors to make sure they can take advantage of this. So that's kind of why it matters to you guys. You want to understand this as you're working on a deal with one of your vendors. Understand so you can make sure that your agreement can be adjusted properly.
Right. And the key right now is if you're negotiating a cloud base, you want a software component, software license component included. That ensures your capitalization. Again, hopefully in 9 months you won't have to have that. And your main concern then will be the term of the agreement because you don't want to do a 2-year agreement and amortize your entire implementation cost over 2 years. You're going to want to have an agreement that's 10 years out and maybe has optional extensions because the way it's drafted right now, you can actually amortize it over the optional extension periods as well.
Awesome. And to add to both points there, I think one of the reasons when organizing this panel discussion with the Z-Prime folks, they kept saying, when we're out there with utilities, that's all we hear about is the whole CapEx, OpEx, discussion around cloud technologies and, being able to kind of decipher between the accounting aspect of capitalization and separating that out from the rate recovery aspect of capitalization. We're going to get there, but we wanted to have both parts of that conversation exist in this panel. So thanks, Brad, for that. And also just a note on what Brad has just kind of articulated, a summary of that. If you'd like that summary in writing, we are working on that to be able to take that with you. You can come up and see us afterwards, and we'll be happy to get you that information, just a summary of the FASB rulings and the status where it is to help any discussions. But, yep, is there a question?
Did you refer to that as 350-40?
350-40 is, it's called topic 350-40. That is the capitalization for internal use software. Been around forever. The evolution is they're now saying you can use 350-40 for now these expanded scope of arrangements all the way into the cloud-based.
And if there are any municipal utilities in the audience, Mark and I kind of fall under that category. We follow GASB, which is falling a little bit slower behind that, about 2 years behind that. But it's very good to look at that to see what's coming our way, and you can actually talk to your accountants and kind of show them this information and possibly persuade them to go in a particular direction. But historically, we've been very conservative with how do we treat that. We'd rather treat it as an O&M rather than take a guess on a capital and then have a ruling come down later and then have to back it out.
Great, thanks, Jason. And along the lines of accounting standards changing, Jason, I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about what you see or what are some of the future trends you see that will impact the capitalization process even more so in the next 5 years.
Yeah, so I was surprised to see the survey of the audience of the number of cloud applications. I actually thought it might be a little bit higher. But I actually see another trend out there that's going to be a bigger impact, I believe, to utilities, and that's really edge computing. I've heard a few people talk about it, and that's definitely something that we can capitalize. We're putting devices out in the field and the whole IoT thing. So, cloud's still going to be around. I don't want to say that cloud's dead and everything's going to the edge, but there's this idea that we're going to have to do this compute at the edge and not backhaul all that data back to a cloud provider in Washington State or Washington, D.C. to make that decision to put that back down. No, we're going to do all that calculation on the edge. So that's kind of a big mega trend that I see coming on. Another thing that I see is, historically we've bought these monolithic application ERP systems were very popular in the 2000s. But in the future, you're seeing a trend towards a containerization of an application. And you may have heard a term called microservices. So in the cloud, you're going to have a lot of these little functions, functionality in your app that are going to be able to spin up in real time based on demand and then spin back down. That's really going to help us if we do have to expense some of these services on that end, because we're not consuming the service 24/7. We're only consuming those when the demand is actually there. Actually, Amazon Alexa, if you've done any development or heard about some of that, it uses what Amazon calls, and all of them have a different term for this, called serverless computing. So your code kind of exists in a database, if you will, in the cloud, and at the moment that it gets invoked, it gets pushed over on some compute hardware and some memory and execute. And as soon as it's finished, it deconstructs that out of it. So you're only using a very small percentage of the service. These other two ideas that I've kind of seen is a little bit more, I got a feeling, 5 years from now, you asked me about 5 years, you're going to replay this video back to me and I'm going to regret making these kind of bets. The other two, I'm very confident in what I see. But the next one is really, there's a fundamental change in computer architecture. I don't want to make it too of a technical session, but you need to be aware of what's going on. So, historically, we've always had spinning disk, and now we've gotten all solid state, storage, and then we've always had this RAM. It's a super fast capability. Applications kind of run in RAM. That line between storage and RAM is blurring, and there's a technology from a lot of the different vendors, Micron and Intel, called 3D Crosspoint, where those two things blur. So your transactional systems of tomorrow are going to run, storage and memory are going to be one thing. So they're always going to be in memory. So we're going to have a lot more in memory kind of applications on that. And that's really going to help us in the cloud, because they're going to be the ones that are going to make the investments in those new technologies and not make those capital investments to put that technology in your data center until you're sure all your applications are going to be rewritten, because this is 50 years of computer architecture that's being rewritten. So it's kind of an interesting trend to kind of watch. And the final thing that I would say is the application market space and utilities in general are getting more API, application program interfaces. We used to do a lot of integration, which we can capitalize under these rules, with middleware and file structures, but APIs are going to have a big component going forward, and they already are. And that's really going to get us into a new model where we're not buying necessarily software packages, but we're buying different services. So an application might be created from 100 different services from 50 different providers. So I see more of licensing algorithms in the future from different startups and our traditional vendors, and less buying software packages. So those are kind of my 4 trends.
So if I were to summarize in a sense, the technology is evolving even beyond, just cloud technologies and these models, but coming back to the root of the discussion as far as what can be capitalized and what can't be. I mean, can you comment at all of what you see in those technologies
So
and
obviously,
how that relates back?
Yeah, so absolutely. Obviously, edge computing is definitely going to be something that we can capitalize. I think the other ones, the microservices, are just going to reduce our O&M expend. So we're going to use less of those cloud resources. So it's going to give us a little bit of a break on total cost of ownership. I'm not sure if we're going to see a capitalization of that, but there might be some rulings coming down on that.
I think even under the newer ruling, the cost that you'll need to incur to switch over to those type systems should be capitalizable.
Yeah, as you kind of migrate from
Right.
one system to the other, absolutely. As far as the kind of change in computer architecture to 3D Crosspoint, I think that's really just hedging your bet of buying server technologies for your data centers. There's a fundamental shift coming, and you see things like, I don't want to be too vendor specific, but SAP HANA is kind of what they have right now is kind of an interim step to the future. So do you want to wait for that, or do you want to contract with a cloud provider that's going to manage that risk for you? So it's a way to kind of use the capitalization rules, but then have some protection on your architecture going forward. And then I think the final thing, it will kind of fit very well with the software portability. These algorithms will be portable, and I think we will be able to capitalize those. But that's kind of stuff that we're going to have discussions with our regulators on, and make sure it'll be the same type of probably time span of doing that. But I just wanted to make those kind of things that, cloud is really something you should be looking at today, but there are a couple mega trends that are happening that we kind of want to keep an eye on.
So that's a good segue into regulators, or is a good segue into a question that I'd love for Mark to address. We've talked about the accounting perspective of capitalization, the evolving technology trends and cloud models, but Mark, can you help us delineate between the capitalization from that accounting perspective and what I would call regulatory capitalization, or the rate-making process specifically for private utilities? I know from the municipal perspective it's not quite the same process, but for those private utilities, how this impacts that rate-making process.
Sure. Couple caveats. First is, every state has its own public utility commission or some version of it, and they're going to have their own opinion. In fact, that individual commissioners are going to have their own opinions. And the other caveat is what we're really referring to is those whose prices are regulated by those commissions. If you're in a competitive market or competitive segment of business, your pricing is going to be whatever the market will bear, and whether it's CapEx or OpEx really is going to impact your earnings. And so but for a regulated utility, you have to go back more than 100 years to railroads, which is why do we have public utility commissions? And that's because at one time they wanted to regulate railroads, and they knew it would require a lot of upfront capital to build those railroads and keep those railroads maintained. And so the idea of a rate of return on rate base was developed. And so you're assured a guaranteed return on your investment. And so when we look at software as a service and some of these other products, I think some commissioners will look at it and say, what is the investment required by the utility? And that's where I think we may have a division between the accounting treatment and the rate-making treatment. And so if a utility isn't required to make an upfront investment, they may not allow you to put it in rate base. And that's where utilities make their money, an adequate return on that rate base. If it's an operating expense, it's a flow-through. And so I think that will be the challenge. And what it does is it creates a disincentive for a regulated utility, because you want them to do things to provide better services at a lower cost. But from their perspective, they're not getting a return on investment, so they're more likely to go with the old model, buying your software, buying the building, buying the land, buying the server, buying the rack, and capitalizing all that and being able to put that into a rate base. And so I think the bigger question is, is the customer paying the right amount? And so maybe what we should look at is not only in addition to the accounting side, which it's slowly catching up, but on the rate making side, it really should we be using some different form of rate making at the state levels? And we have performance-based rate making and some other ideas that are emerging, but those are going to be slow to come about. I think the real challenge will be is one, an investor-owned utility files a rate filing before a PUC, software as a service, and test that PUC to see if they go in that direction. So those of you that are on the software application side and you're looking at a potential customer in that segment, I do some research on those PUC filings and find out, has that been tested? And once the sort of horse is out of the barn, everyone else will follow on. But I certainly encourage us to start going in a direction of cloud-based computing because it's a better service and it's cheaper for our customers.
Thanks, Mark. I just was taking some notes because to me, a century-old rate-making process is what we're using in the digital era of technology. So I just wanted to pause for a moment on that. And you said a lot in there, and I think there are a lot of changes, but I think we're at this critical point in the industry in embracing digital technologies, but we're still working under some really old processes that were created before we really even had technology in the sense that we know about today. So I just kind of wanted to pause on that thought. So thanks for sharing that. And I love the question about, is the customer paying the right amounts in that whole recovery process?
I've got a couple of points if you'd like me to add to that.
Please.
Jim on the back asked a question about a particular situation. There's a couple states that are being pretty progressive on allowing the rate of return issue for you investor-owned utilities. New York, for example, they've got a case, 14-M-0101. They, I think, approved this particular situation late last year. And in essence, what they've said is they're allowing an operational expense, many things, one of which would be like a service, like a cloud service, to be considered like a lease. And if you take that lease and you pay it up front, you can add a rate of return to that. So my point here is PUCs are starting to make the transition. They're recognizing sometimes technology gets ahead of the legal aspects of our society and also the regulatory aspects of our society. Facebook's about to get caught up with the legal aspects, I think, but that's a whole other topic we won't go into today. But Illinois also, they're being very progressive. They've got a commissioner up there you probably have heard of, Brian Shahan, and he's been kind of championing cloud as a service for a while now, and other utility commissions as well. So Illinois is talking about starting the process in May to change their regulations to more easily allow rate application to the service. There's also a commissioner in DC that I know that came to one of our events last year, and if you want to, I do a shameless plug, but we've got a video where he talks about there's 3 things an IOU should consider if they want to try to attempt to put it into their rate case. His name's Commissioner Willie Phillips on the DC PSC. If you go to cloudforutilities.org, our website, I think it's on our home page. It's like a 3-minute short video, and he talks about, number one issue is any PUC should consider it, but it's going to depend on your business case. You've got to show the value of taking that particular service and applying it to your rate case. One real simple formula to me is if I pay $8 million for a 5-year service and that's added to my rate case with their percentage change versus a $10 million capital project that's on-prem, how's that best for the customer, right? So I think that just logic's going to deem to us that you should at least consider this. You guys as utilities may not decide it's the best thing for you. Obviously, that's a utility by utility decision. But what we're seeing is that cloud is definitely going to be part of your technology stack as we change to the utility of the future. That's definitely around the corner. One other thing, I'll quit rambling here, is as I ask utilities what's their concerns about cloud computing, I get a couple of things: capitalization and the rate aspects in their rate cases. And that's one. And number 2 is cybersecurity. So I think as you dig into what's your business, the people that are doing these types of service, this is what they focus on. They focus on managing systems, protecting data. That's what they do. That's their core business. They do big investments into tools, technology, processes to secure the data. I personally think that might be a good thing for someone like that to do for you guys, to protect your assets and your customers' data. But anyway, Indiana is doing another thing I just read about to promote cloud. They're actually not, they changed the taxation law this week, literally, to not charge taxes on software as a service. So I thought that was interesting, trying to promote that application for their customers. And I talked to you about New York. California, they are actually progressing towards cloud as well. Southern Cal Edison did a big presentation at our summit back in November. They're implementing, I think, an SAP ERP solution, a very large implementation, and they're putting the CRM portion of that application into the cloud, onto the SAP cloud. So they were able to get parts of that through the rate case. So each utility, I think, is seeing people put together business cases, provides value, and they're starting to prove it. So you might want to research some of those cases to help you with your particular projects.
I would add to that, one of the things we are seeing is more and more software is only available as a service in the cloud. And there are at some point where you have to replace your software. So you're going to lose vendor support, or it doesn't meet your needs anymore. And as we see that trend across the industry, there's going to be a point in time where that will be the norm, and I think will force the PUCs, even if they're hesitant to adopt it, to look at that. And I think
Right.
we're coming close to that point.
It's just the evolution of technology. I mean, it's happening. I think I read an article the other day where it was a Snapchat. Now, they're a technology company, not a regulated utility, but they're running a pretty big business. They signed, I think, a $2 billion deal with Google to put their entire infrastructure into the cloud. They've got pretty important data from their perspective, so it's starting to happen in the commercial world for sure. It seems like a matter of time before we'll start adapting cloud more readily as well.
Great. I think just one maybe wrap-up question for the panel, and then we can open it up to the audience for any additional questions. I think there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but Jason, Mark specifically, from a utility perspective, Rick talked a lot about some of the benefits of cloud cybersecurity or management of the technology changes when you move that to a services provider to kind of manage all of that. But what are some other advantages you see from a utility perspective of not managing that on-prem and moving that into a service or to a technology service provider?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I wanted to get across is sometimes it won't pencil out necessarily with the initial cost, so you'll get a pricing in from the vendor and you'll kind of build an architecture around that. But if you just looked at what the vendor proposal is and then maybe add some internal costs for implementing, that's the wrong way to go about looking at the cloud. Look at the total cost of ownership of this application. And that means data center support people. That means maintenance that you would have to incur on that hardware. It means the security kind of model that you need to do. Now, you still have to do security in the cloud. You can't outsource all of that. And you certainly want to build in consistency, especially with single sign-on when an employee leaves your company and goes out in the parking lot and accesses that app from the web. You want to be able to revoke that from those cloud sites. So you can't outsource all of it, but they are taking a bulk of that risk away from you depending on what sort of package it is. And I think that you look at the applications that really lend themselves in the cloud are really those customer-facing ones. So you're not bringing your customers, hairpinning them into your data center and then back out. Have somebody who can scale. So you don't have to buy that capital equipment, put it in your data center, and then overbuy, because then you have to plan growth for it. And then by the time you finally get the right level, you got to replace that hardware. So you can definitely leverage cloud. I've been the head of enterprise architecture at CPS Energy for 10 years and probably have looked at hundreds of utility applications that have come through kind of the review cycle. And there's almost none of them that I would say that cannot be done in the cloud. It's really a question, should they be done in the cloud? Things like SCADA and power plant control systems, probably those are the exceptions. You don't want to put those in the cloud for a while. There may be some technology in the future that'll give us the low latency that we need to have in those particular apps. But normal applications, mobile apps, customer-facing apps, those are tailor-made from the cloud. Why build that capability internally with your IT staff when you can get it on pennies on the dollar? The economy of scale of Facebook and Google and Amazon buying a server compared to a corporation buying a server, it's hundreds of X. Difference, because we're buying, what they call pets instead of cattle. If their server dies, it just rolls over to the next server. Our dies, we fly people in from all over the country to try to bring it back up. That's got a cost to your utility. So factor those into the total cost of ownership.
My theory is do what you do best and buy the rest. And we're utility companies. And we're transitioning from something that just simply provides, in our case, electricity, to being an energy services company. And so we've got our hands, busy taking care of our customers and making sure that they got what they need. To Jason's point, to any extent that we can offshed things like maintaining software and maintaining servers, and that means that's much more time and money we can spend in taking care of our customers. And so I think this is definitely a direction we want to go, and there's no reason why we should all be software experts or pseudo experts.
Yeah, the final thing I'll say on that is, CPS Energy about 5 years ago made the decision to put its AMI system in the cloud. And I said, game on. If that can go in the cloud, just about anything can go in the cloud. And we were able to capitalize that because we owned the license and the implementation costs. So that was 5 years ago.
I think Rick wanted to make one more comment, and then we can open it up for any questions.
Real quick, business case for doing a cloud solution, it's just like anything else. You want to compare the cost, all the individual assets, and the benefits. One thing that we're seeing, at least with smaller utilities, is they're comparing their legacy on-prem applications that they've had for 30 years to a cloud solution with a modern architecture, modern database, service-oriented architecture, all the cool new technology. And the numbers don't work out, as you said. I mean, that was a great point. We're finding that they need to do that comparison based on similar technology on-prem to a cloud model, simply because a lot of them don't have things baked into the cloud services. Cloud service models come with high availability, automatic failover, disaster recovery, and I'm finding smaller mid-market utilities, they have those things, but it's at a remote site. I take yesterday's backup tape when I travel across town, where that's happening instantaneously with these high-end cloud services. So just keep that in mind as you start doing your business case. You've got to make sure you compare apples to apples. 30-year-old legacy process systems aren't going to compare to a cloud model, and your numbers are going to get skewed. So just be aware of that.
I'll add what Mark said too. I think we've got almost all cloud-based apps for all of our internal apps as well, and the biggest benefit I see is the perpetual upgrades. Yep. You're not going to schedule an upgrade out in 3 years. It's going to, one, put your entire business at risk, and two, cost you a lot of money. And with any cloud-based service, you're going to have those probably every 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got off the CapEx model, but I wanted to share that.
That's okay. I think all relevant to the discussion, and I didn't know if anybody in the audience had any questions. Yes?
So here again, systems or an engineering software company. Obviously, I'm related to someone who's an engineer.
Yeah.
It's a family company. So there's a trend in software companies right now where in licensing they ask you to, we call it the easy pass model. You pay up front for access to a suite of software applications you don't directly buy. In the course of maybe a calendar year, that amount of money is consumed. Maybe it rolls over to the next year. We've run into, in our space, difficulties with capitalization, and what is the state of play right now in terms of how you approach paying for something you don't necessarily own or certainly use?
So from just an accounting perspective on FASB, that is difficult to capitalize now because it doesn't pass one of the two tests, which is portability of the license. So if you only have it for a very short period of time, you can't take it with you, you can't reinstall it. That's what's stopping most people from capitalizing what you just described. Under the new proposal, that would be capitalized. So we're going to have to kind of wait and see if that gets accepted. But you don't have to own the software, and it doesn't need to be portable anymore, hopefully starting in January 2019. But right now it is a problem.
That proposal literally just was issued, a week or so ago, so it's very new information.
is they're going to get comments in April, and like I said, if it goes fast, there's a lot of pressure. The FASB only moves when people hassle them, and so you can bet Salesforce.com is hassling the FASB daily, and a lot of other people are as well. So it may not go that fast, but it could go as fast as January. Usually, once they pass something, you can wait a year to apply it, or you can do it quickly. And we're kind of hoping it goes in play in January, but I can't guarantee that.
Yeah, we've seen different models with that where a vendor will give you the same price in the cloud or on-prem, and the idea that you kind of have some portability in there. But if it's classified as a subscription, regardless if I can do that, our accountants are going to say that's OpEx, and we'll say yes, sir, that's what we're going to do.
Yes, sir.
In the SaaS model, there's typically upfront fees and then annual recurring fees. In the FASB model, does that provide a benefit to these annual recurring fees year after year?
Now you're going to make it really technical. There's when they go back to the internal use software, it was very prescriptive in that pre-design work for an implementation is expensed, and then you basically once you kick it off, you capitalize, and then you go live. Then you trip into OpEx. So here's the technical part. There are some aggressive accounting departments that will take the ongoing, or shouldn't call them aggressive, maybe progressive accounting departments that will take the ongoing fees because of those automatic upgrades I talked about. That essentially is doing a mini re-implementation every 6 months, every year. So some accounting functions will take those ongoing OpEx fees, and they'll actually carve out an amount they think is a fair representation for the upgrades, the extra enhancements that are done each year, and they will capitalize that as well.
Yes, sir.
I'm a huge proponent of cloud services, so please don't make this the wrong way. I don't think it's wrong. The fear, as with when SAP rolled out some of their business models a few years back, everybody said, you're completely making us completely redo our business processes. And SAP said, well, maybe you're doing it the wrong way to start with. The concern I would see, we're finally getting to a point where we're seeing innovation in the customer experience related to utilities. We're seeing innovation in the operations side of the utility as relates to how they run their processes. Going to a cloud model where you are now a service receiver for a whole variety of software packages that are being provided by the cloud provider, is there not some concern that the innovation is going to be dampened because people will simply be buying the package as it's presented, and that's the only option you have? I know for a fact utilities across the country interface with their customers and operate their systems in dramatically different fashions. And forcing them all into the same model seems a risk.
Yeah, it's definitely tough when you make those technology bets with those historic providers. But a lot of times what we see, as I mentioned earlier, the customer is the area of innovation and where you really want to be in the cloud to be able to use all these APIs and different services that come out that we haven't even thought of together. And what you'll see there is typically a back office ERP system connected up to a cloud services. So we're just shuttling data back and forth to make that happen. So we kind of leveraging our old investment as we kind of get more reactive to customer demand and new services and on that platform that's really designed around that. So that's one thing that I've seen people to do, but it is, it's not an all, it's more of a hybrid approach. It's not all like I've got to go with the traditional, this is what comes out of the box service. And even the vendor that you mentioned has different CRM tools, actually two, that they'll sell you that kind of front that, and they're more cloudy.
Let me add on to that. Luckily, in my position, I get to meet with a lot of the vendors out there, the Oracle, SAP, the Vertexes of the world. In the last 6 months, I've been kind of evaluating implementation methodologies and also configurability. The thing they're all driving to is common process in their methodologies that are flexible through configuration. So they're not trying to pigeonhole a utility into a software company's best practice. It's more flexible than that. So it's not as monolithic as you might be worried. I'm seeing utilities being able to adapt in things that do require customization. If you go back to the slide I gave you guys, the enterprise portion of why I'm saying enterprise SaaS is there's room for tailoring the software. So if you've got a regulatory issue that has to be done, in a model like Salesforce, you don't change code. In the utility-specific models, they're allowing for things that have to be tailored, so my process won't let me do that out of the box. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, and I will assume that they are incorporating a greater degree of flexibility in their customer-facing interfaces from the
Gotcha.
We got tornadoes this year, so we're feeling the pain a little bit too.
I think we're at the 1 minute mark, so maybe one more question and then we can wrap up. Yes, sir.
I had a question, I believe, Jason, you were referring to 4 megatrends, technology megatrends that had CapEx, OpEx implications. And the one you mentioned that interests me because of all the talk about edge computing and distributed technology associated with DERMS and DER. How do you see that CapEx, OpEx financial issues impacting edge computing specifically?
Well, I'm kind of using the model, and this might be something I refer to the 2 CFOs. We kind of have this same problem with desktop compute. You know, the actual value of a desktop computer is pretty low, but we're able to bundle those into a larger buy that gets it over a capital threshold, so we capitalize that particular device. With edge computing, they're going to be fairly inexpensive devices, but we're going to buy them in mass. We're going to buy hundreds of thousands of those, so that's the way I see it, being kind of a capital model in IoT. We're not doing anything on a small scale in a utility kind of environment. It's huge.
I would just add that utilities routine is called unitization. So when we buy a lot of units, we unitize that to capitalize.
Right.
We're not, depreciating a single laptop. We're depreciating 1,000 laptops or 5,000 laptops.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. And yeah.